This Monday saw the start of the progressive return to on-site classes in Venezuela under strict biosecurity measures. In Bolivia, the survivors and relatives of victims of the Sacaba and Senkata massacres arrived in La Paz on Monday after a week-long march across the country to demand justice for the crimes committed during the 2019 coup against the Evo Morales government. The trial of 14 men, including Burkina Faso's former president, accused in the assassination of revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara 34 years ago, resumed at a military court this Monday. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Venezuela, where this Monday saw the start of the progressive return to on-site classes amidst biosecurity measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. President Nicolas Maduro urged the authorities to reinforce the preventative measures in all educational centres across the country. The head of state also noted that at the same time, the vaccination campaign for children over 12 years of age began this October 25th. President Maduro explained that a scheme to make lockdown measures more flexible across the country will be implemented as of November 1st and run through December.
As of this Monday, on-site classes began in Venezuela. On-site classes returned in Venezuela with absolute biosecurity, having achieved a general control of the coronavirus. The vaccination of children over 12 years old and older starts. It's already another advantage. This means that in all the high schools we are going to be vaccinating all the children of the high schools, and also to complete 100% of vaccination of the personnel of the educational sector.
I don't really agree, because there is still a lot of uncertainty about the COVID-19, which is a terrible disease, which is tough, but it is necessary for children to go back to school. We are not going to start directly with the face-to-face classes. We are going to attend to the students' population from nursery to 5th grade in this first moment or first period, only with pedagogical advice, since the school, as I mentioned, is not suitable to receive the student population. Today, Monday 25th, we started the vaccination day. We are waiting for them to come, and this week will be a very complete vaccination day.
Taking into account the progress and effectiveness of the vaccination campaign in Cuba and the prospect that over 90% of the population will be fully vaccinated by next month, authorities adopted the final measures to fully reopen the country's borders as of November 15th. Minister of Tourism Juan Carlos Garcia Granda informed that mandatory PCR tests on arrival will no longer be required for international travellers who are vaccinated, and mandatory quarantine requirements will also be lifted for these visitors. Instead, vaccinated travellers must present a health passport or international anti-COVID-19 certificate, including those vaccines certified by the corresponding regulatory authorities. The minister also highlighted the mandatory use of face masks within air and port terminals, as well as throughout the country. China donated another batch of Sinovac vaccines to the Philippines on Sunday to support the country's COVID-19 vaccination campaign. The donation arrived in Manila along with more doses of the same vaccine that the Philippines purchased from China. In a brief statement to reporters at the airport, Chinese ambassador to the Southeast Asian nation, Huang Xizhan, said the latest vaccine donation demonstrated the friendship between the two countries. China has provided a sustained supply of vaccines against COVID-19 to the Philippines since the first batch was delivered on February 28th, allowing the country to kick off its vaccination drive on March 1st. To date, over 55 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered, with more than 25 million Filipinos fully vaccinated. The government aims to vaccinate up to 70 million people this year. The Director General of the World Health Organization has underlined that the COVID-19 pandemic will be over when the world chooses to end it, adding the tools needed to accomplish this goal are available.
The answer is that the pandemic will end when the world chooses to end it. It is in our hands. We have all the tools we need: effective public health tools, and effective medical tools. But the world has not used those tools well.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Bolivia, the survivors and relatives of victims of the Sacaba and Senkata massacres arrived in La Paz on Monday after a week-long march across the country to demand justice for the crimes committed during the 2019 coup against the Evo Morales government. The protesters set off from the town of Caracollo in the department of Oruro and walked 190 kilometers to reach the capital and reiterate their call for all of those linked to the coup violence to be prosecuted for their crimes. On arriving in the city of El Alto previously, the march was provided with food and accommodation by the local authorities. On Saturday, the victims' families and the survivors presented the government with a document comprised of 22 demands, which are set to be reviewed and responded to in an audience presided by Bolivian Head of State President Luis Arce. The Sacaba and Senkata massacres resulted in the deaths of at least 37 people, while some 500 were injured. The de facto regime of Janine Áñez also tortured and detained over 1,000 political prisoners. In Guatemala, a tense calm reigns in the northeastern indigenous village of El Estor after the military was deployed to quash protests against a Swiss mining company. Hundreds of police and military personnel are deployed in the lakeside town, where they continue to frisk people at checkpoints following the violent repression of protesters over the weekend. The government imposed martial law and a dusk-to-dawn curfew on Sunday and filled the town with 20,000 residents with security forces. Teams carried out searches at homes and offices looking for protest leaders, while targets went into hiding. The police were deployed to prevent protesters from blocking trucks from entering and leaving a nickel processing plant, which shares the site with the disputed mine. The Phoenix mine, owned by Guatemala Nickel Company, a subsidiary of Switzerland's Solvay Investment Group, is under a court order to carry out a public consultation process in the community about the project, which locals stress pollutes Lake Izabal. With the presence of Army General Raul Castro, the second plenary session of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba concluded on Sunday in Havana. The debate not only focused on topics concerning the party itself, but also addressed the complex situation in the country due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the moves to revitalise the Cuban economy. Participants also analysed the ongoing campaign by the United States government to undermine the rule of law and promote acts of destabilisation in its bid to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. In his closing speech, President Miguel Díaz-Canel stressed that the Cuban state and people will not allow for imperialist intervention in the country's internal affairs. Díaz-Canel also added that the vast majority of the population is committed to continuing the struggle to advance despite the limitations caused by the US blockade.
We will not legitimize imperialist plans in our domestic politics, nor give cause to the desires of neo-colonial restoration, which some have fed and which are reinforced in a situation of crisis. With such actions, it is intended to return the country to a historical time of subjugation, to which we will never return.
In Ethiopia, the National Army carried out 2 airstrikes in the northern region of Tigray as part of the war against the front that controls most of the region. The attacks targeted the western area of Tigray as the government continues its bid to eliminate the Tigray People's Liberation Front, despite the humanitarian crisis in the region. Authorities claim the offensive seeks to neutralise a training site and an industrial military facility that belong to the front. The conflict that broke out in November 2020 shows no signs of ending, despite international condemnation and reports of widespread rights abuses. Official numbers set the death toll in the tens of thousands, while at least 2 million people have been internally displaced in Tigray. Over 75,000 Ethiopians have fled into neighbouring Sudan, while those who remain in Tigray face famine. The annual summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations opened on Monday. Inaugurating the event, the Sultan and Prime Minister of Brunei and pro-tempore President of the regional bloc, Hassan al-Bolkiah, highlighted the importance of solidarity to face the COVID-19 pandemic.
COVID-19 pandemic is a world crisis like no other. It has affected our health and the socio-economic order to an unprecedented scale, never before seen in the modern world. With the pandemic ongoing, the global economy is still fragile and, in the fight against this crisis, it is more important than ever for the Asian and its direct associates to increase cooperation and solidarity, and to encourage constant participation between the private and public sectors.
The Prime Minister of Brunei also noted that the association will lead the initiatives for economic recovery in the region with the goal of ensuring sustainable prosperity for all member states.
Brunei Darussalam, as 2021 President of ASEAN, has the honor of leading the region toward economic recovery. The phrase, "we care, we prepare, we prosper," assures the collective commitment of ASEAN toward the well-being of its people and in preparing for the future challenges and opportunities with the eye on making the whole Asian community prosper in a sustainable way.
Environmental organisations continue to protest the lack of progress in important areas such as renewable energy ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP26, set to begin in the Scottish city of Glasgow at the end of this month. People gathered in the UK capital London to demand more urgent and significant action from world governments to address the pressing issues of radically increasing CO2 emissions, the fluctuation of the energy market and the uneven distribution of resources among social sectors, as well as a lack of control in terms of environmental regulations, which allows corporations to overlook their impact on climate change.
So Insulate Britain have asked the government to insulate all Britain's houses because it's a great way to reduce our carbon emissions by about 10%. At the moment, houses in Britain are some of the leakiest, draftiest houses in Europe.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The trial of 14 men, including Burkina Faso's former president, accused in the assassination of revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara 34 years ago, resumed at a military court this Monday. The murder of Sankara, a pan-Africanist icon, has for years cast a shadow over the impoverished Sahel state, where calls for justice have intensified. Sankara and 12 others were shot dead by a hit squad on October 15, 1987, during a coup that brought Blaise Compaoré to power. The proceedings opened on October 11th and were adjourned at the request of the defence lawyers, who wanted more time to study the 20,000 items in the dossier. 12 of the 14 accused were in court on Monday. The trial resumed with the presentation of a list of 60 witnesses that the court wants to hear from, including by video link for those who are aboard. The Marxist-Leninist Sankara came to power in 1983, aged just 33. He tossed out the country's name of Upper Volta, a legacy of the French colonial era, and renamed it Burkina Faso, which means the land of honest men, and led a socialist agenda of nationalisations while banning female genital mutilation and forced marriages.
If they can help with this, I think that why not to go to video conferencing? Because there are a lot of people who really want to be free of this problem. It's been 34 years. Some were 28 years old at the time. Today they are 62, 63 years old. They are retired. But as they are accused, there are some who really want to be free. I believe that there would even be a disturbance of the public order. The notion of disturbance of the peace has not been sufficiently discussed. But you can imagine that tomorrow the population learns that the defendants in this exceptional trial are free, and you can imagine the outcry that this will create. You can also imagine that they are let go, and since they have seen all the witnesses who were present today, the risk of pressure on the witnesses is possible. We are fortunate to have them in custody today, so they have to appear.
In Sudan, the head of the Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, announced the dissolution of the transitional government and declared a state of emergency following the arrest of the Prime Minister and other officials. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok was arrested and transferred to an unknown site for refusing to cooperate with the coup, according to the Ministry of Information, which at that point was still under the control of his supporters. On Monday, thousands of people took to the streets of Khartoum and other cities of the country to reject the move by the military to retake power. At least 12 people were injured during the repression of a demonstration in front of the army headquarters. And the United Nations Special Representative for Sudan called on the military to release those detained in the coup and work towards the political transition.
Demanding from everybody to exercise utmost restraint. I'm calling on the military to release all those that were unlawfully detained today, and I'm asking all stakeholders to return to dialogue and restore the constitutional order, as well as not to put domestic peace and political transition at risk as UNITAMs. But what we know is that the army this morning has detained or first put under house arrest Prime Minister Hamdok and then reportedly brought him and his wife to an unknown destination or unknown location after he reportedly refused to dissolve the government. That had been a demand from the military for a couple of days.
Mali's interim government has expelled a representative of the Economic Community of West African States from the country over actions the government said were incompatible with his status. ECOWAS Special Representative Hamidou Bouli was given 72 hours to leave the Sahel state after being declared a persona non grata. It was unclear what triggered the expulsion, but it comes at a time of growing pressure on Mali's military rulers to return power to civilians. Mali slid into political turmoil last year with a coup led by Colonel Assimi Goïta in August 2020 against President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Under the threat of sanctions, the military then appointed an interim civilian government tasked with steering the country back to democratic rule. But Goïta overthrew the leaders of that interim government in May in a second coup and was later declared interim president himself, drawing international condemnation. Both the 15-nation Economic Community of West African States and the United Nations have insisted on swift elections to restore civilian rule. Nigeria has become the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to fully launch a digital currency, which it's called the e-Naira. The country joins China and a few other countries using or piloting central bank-regulated electronic tender. Nigeria has seen booming interest in cryptocurrencies as people look for ways to avoid the weakening local Naira currency and combat high cost of living and unemployment in Africa's most populous country. Central bank-backed digital currencies and cryptocurrencies are both virtual money, but the former are legal tender regulated by central banks, while cryptos are out of government control. 5 countries have already launched central bank-backed digital currencies, with another 14, including Sweden and South Korea, in the pilot stage, according to the Atlantic Council's tracking project.
The adoption of central bank digital currencies and its underlying technology called blockchain can increase Nigeria's GDP by 29 billion United States dollars over the next 10 years. The use of central bank digital currencies can help move away more people and businesses from the informal into the formal sector, thereby creating the tax base of the country. The central bank digital currencies can also help increase remittances, foster cross-border trade, improve financial inclusion, make monetary policy more effective, and enable the government to send direct payments to citizens eligible for specific welfare programs.
The Israeli occupation forces have offered tenders to build over 1,000 new illegal settlement units in occupied West Bank territories. The Zionist regime intends to approve the construction of over 3,000 new units in the occupied territories of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, in addition to other Palestinian territories under Israeli occupation. The Israeli NGO Peace Now accused Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of leading an annexionist government, which follows in the footsteps of the previous executive. Movements for the liberation of Palestine demanding an end to the illegal settlement policy and the definitive respect for the sovereignty and state of Palestine. The Syrian province of Idlib has seen several attacks by the al-Nusra Front extremist group. Other terrorist groups operating in the country have also intensified their bombings near major cities like Aleppo, Hama and Latakia. Authorities warn that these locations are frequent targets of extremists. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed in a statement that members of the terrorist al-Nusra Front are responsible for the renewed aggressions in the country, precisely when the Syrian government has retaken control of the vast majority of the country. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.